questions about it. How many of you read, I think it was a week, was it last? No, it was a week ago, 2 weeks ago, the bulletin 2 weeks ago. Remember what it said? What did the bulletin 2 weeks ago say? What was it about? It was about a student who was looking at fish, basically, and his professor was telling him, keep looking at it. Well, when I'm telling you to ask questions, that's what I mean. How did that professor finally get him to keep looking for the things about that fish and learn about it? He asked him questions about it. You need to ask questions about the Bible. We've talked about that. One of the greatest examples of that need is in Job, when basically in the first 2 chapters, when at the end of each chapter it tells you, Job, in all this, Job did not sin with his lips or accuse God of wrong. At the end of both chapters. At the very beginning. And the natural question that you should be asking is, why am I being told this now? If Job didn't do or say anything wrong, why wasn't I told that at the end of the book? Why am I being told this at the very beginning? We talked about a little bit the other week, I think I brought it up, about studying meekness. We talked about Moses. Right around the end of Exodus, I forget exactly what chapter it is, but we're told that Moses went up on the mountain with God, and he died there, and God buried him, and nobody knows to this day where Moses is buried. Did you ever stop and think, why am I being told that nobody knows where Moses is buried? Did you ever think about that? Well, why are you told? Why did God think it important to tell you that nobody knows where Moses is buried? Why did God tell you that? Mike had a good answer. I give him credit for this. Because Moses could have had a pyramid, and everybody in the world today would know where Moses is buried. Because they could find it archaeologically. Moses made a choice at the beginning of his life. He decided not to be basically the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He could have been high in the kingdom, maybe even Pharaoh one day. And he made a different choice. He got a different reward. And I think that's the way God points these things out to us. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. I want to go over this timeline. And if you want a copy of this timeline, I will give it to you. Just send me an email, send me a text with your email notes, with your email address, because I got to send it via email. I can't get it on my phone. It's pretty big. If you want a copy of this timeline, I did this. I've seen teachers put timelines up here, and they're so dense and so small and so busy that you can't tell heads or tails of what they really tell you. I'm sorry. It's just that way. So I made my own timeline. I made my own simple timeline. I want you to remember 3 dates, okay, off of this timeline. Maybe 4, okay? I want you to remember approximately 2000 BC, Abraham is introduced to us, okay? I want you to remember that they went down into Egypt. I want you to remember that they were there 430 years. I think, Steve, you found the passage the other day that says they were there 430 years to the day in Exodus. That's important. Joshua tells us it was 45 years from the time they went in to spy the land just after they'd come out of Egypt until the time that he was dividing the land up. It was 45 years. That's an important date, too. Now, I'm sure some of you are saying, well, why is that very important? Okay, we'll maybe talk to that in another lesson. I want you to remember 1000 BC. I want you to remember that that's right in the middle of Saul, David, and Solomon's kingdom. That's probably right in the middle of David's reign, about 1000 BC. I want you to remember 606, 597, and 587. That's when the Babylonians came. First in 606, then later in 597, and then they destroyed the whole thing in Solomon's temple in 587 BC. All 3 times they carried people away into Babylon from Judea, and they left nobody there. Okay, go read about the good figs and the bad figs in Jeremiah. Okay? The good figs. He had a vision about figs, good ones and bad ones. The good ones were the ones taken away, and the bad ones were the ones that were left, which is not kind of what we think. And I want you to remember 0 and 70 AD, the time of Christ, Jesus' birth, and the destruction of the temple. Now, there are other things that go with this that will help you. I've got another one. Here's another one. I'll send you this one too if you want. Just send me a text with your email address or an email. This tells you about when some of the books were. I did not put the minor prophets on here, but it'll give you about the time frame of the prophets. Notice where Ezekiel, Daniel, Jeremiah, and Lamentations are right around the Babylonian captivity. They were in Babylon 70 years, but there's no note of that to the day. There is one 430 years to the day in Exodus. They were in Egypt. And that's an interesting number, and it appears several times later on. So this is kind of a basic outline of the Old Testament. It's very simple. If you understand this while you're reading the books, while you're reading 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, while you're reading Isaiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Jeremiah, while you're reading Esther, Ezra, Nehemiah about the return or about the time in Babylon, Esther's in Babylon, Ezra and Nehemiah about the return time. When you're reading those, understand where it is on God's plan. This is the timeline of the promises. From the moment he gave Abraham a promise that he was going to bring him into the land and through his seed all nations would be blessed, he set out on this timeline. This is important to reading and understanding the Old Testament and reading and understanding the New Testament. So basically, if you want copies of these two timelines, this one, which is a little simpler, you can use it. This one, which is a little more complex, but to kind of help you out, Zechariah and Malachi being the last ones before another period of silence. Send me that text message. Send me your email note. I'll send you these in PDF format or PowerPoint file or Word format or whatever you want. Just let me know. And I'll send you these timelines. I think they can be very valuable. But I got so tired of looking at timelines up here that just have so many mountains of information on it, you can't really understand what's going on. Okay. Daniel opens up around 605 BC and continues to around 540 BC, 530 BC maybe. Somewhere, this is another thing. This is the burr in my saddle. Basically, all these dates are given with surprising accuracy, and when you start reading sources, you're going to find variations in the dates, up to decades. One authority thinks it's this, another authority thinks it's that. You're going to read people that think Abraham was way back as far as 2400 BC and maybe as late as 18 to 1600 BC. 2000 seems to fit pretty good. Good number to remember. So that's kind of where Daniel is and where we're going to open up. The prophecies of Daniel go all the way through Jesus. And Daniel 11 in particular is another prophecy a whole set of prophecies that lead you up to Christ. All of this is going to go fly in the face of what's called dispensational premillennialism. Don't get me started on that. It's a false doctrine. It has no place in Scripture, and basically proper interpretation of the Bible, in my view, does not support it at all. So I want to think about that when we begin to open up and look at Daniel. So while Daniel lived, what's going on? Any of you care? What was going on in the rest of the world while Daniel lived? Does anybody know? Don't everybody speak at once. You all get your chance. Okay, here's some of the things. I was going to ask, Karen, have you been to the Parthenon in Athens? Okay. This might be interesting. Okay, the construction of the Acropolis in Athens began probably during Daniel's lifetime. The Greeks were just beginning to build that when Daniel was living in Babylon. Rome was becoming powerful, and just the beginnings of the Roman Republic were starting while Daniel was prophesying. Some of these things, and this is going on all the way over. The city of Rome had been in existence for about 200 years, but it was beginning to become powerful and develop into what would become the Roman Empire at the time of Christ. The Mayan civilization in Mexico was flourishing. They were putting people on altars and cutting out their living hearts and doing all those kind of things about the time Daniel was prophesying. Aesop wrote his fables about that time. That's what's going on when Daniel is alive and prophesying in different parts of the world. So let's take a look at some of the first things that happened, and we want to know kind of where this is going on too. It says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, and I can't pronounce these kings, so forgive me if I pronounce one wrong, or you know better, let me know. I appreciate it. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And he's talking about the first one. This is about 606, 605, depending on the source you read. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and brought the articles into the treasure of his God. This is probably about the last reference that people give any thought to the Ark of the Covenant. Probably not really referring to the Ark, but at least it mentions the articles of the temple. And he carried them into the land of Shinar. Now, where is Shinar? Anybody know where Shinar is? Where was Shinar? Shinar's been mentioned before. Shinar, say that again. Say that again.
Wasn't it the ark there for a while, like in southern Palestine?
Actually, Shinar means land between two rivers. And so, basically, when you read the story of the Tower of Babel, it talks about Shinar. So that's one of the reasons why the archaeologists are over there in what used to be Babylon and part of Iraq, and they're looking for the Tower of Babel. So that's kind of where Shinar is. Basically, this is a map of Babylon, and best I can tell from some of the things that I've read, and I haven't been there, and whether you believe it or not, I wasn't there when it all happened. Probably the land between the two rivers, this area right in here, northern part of Babylon, Mesopotamia, up near Nineveh, this probably qualifies as a description that's given of Shinar. And it's mentioned several times in the Old Testament. Go back and I'm not going to pick it all up, but you can see where Daniel was taken from Judea all the way up through here, around this way, and down to Babylon. Okay, right around in here. Nobody crosses this. This is desert. So basically to Judea, when it was besieged by kings, either from Egypt, it was besieged by Egypt. Egypt was the king of the south. Remember that when you're reading Daniel. If you approach from Egypt, you're approaching from the south. That's the king of the south. You're reading Daniel and you're being approached by Babylon or Medo-Persia or some of these countries over here that you're coming down from the north. That's the king of the north. That's the way the Bible looks at what these kings are, is the way they approached Jerusalem and Judea. And from what direction? Because nobody at the time came across here because you didn't make it. It's pretty bad territory out there, pretty dry, pretty hot. Okay. What would happen later on? Daniel goes all the way through to Cyrus and the Medo-Persian Empire. At the time we're talking about Daniel, Babylon exists here. The Medo-Persian Empire, if you're getting over into here, into Iran, Afghanistan, further over here is India, back up over here is Greece, and then back down over here off of the map is Egypt. Later on, this area would absorb what was Babylon and take over this area. That's how Cyrus was able to authorize the return of the children of Israel, because now he controlled it as part of the Medo-Persian Empire. So that's kind of the situation of Daniel. Daniel is politically oriented because Daniel lived with the politics of the time. He lived in the palace in Babylon. That's what he was basically familiar with from day to day. It says, in the 3rd year of reign of Jehoiakim, king of the Lord gave Jehoiakim into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. Who is Jehoiakim? Not quite the last one, but he's probably next to the last one, getting real close. Good, though. Good. He's one of the last kings. Who was the last good king of Judea? No. No. Good guess, because Hezekiah was one of the few good ones. I like that. Josiah was the last good king, and probably Josiah controlled by the time, because God blessed Josiah. You need to go read the story of Josiah. Because God blessed Josiah because he was a good king, Josiah probably controlled as much or more territory than David did, or even Solomon. He was a very good king. He did things that the other good kings did not do. Hezekiah put away the worship of the idols, but Josiah not only put away the worship of the idols, he went out and tore down all their altars. Okay? You remember the story of the man of God and the old prophet, the man of God who went up to in the northern kingdom and basically tore down one of the altars up there, had a confrontation with the king, and on his way he was told, when you go there, when you come back, go directly back, don't stop, don't eat, don't do anything, just come directly back. And this old prophet tells him, wait, I got another message from God. Basically, God told you to come into my house and eat before you go back and rest. And he believed him. He didn't get home. God killed him because he didn't follow those. He had a choice. What could he have done when that old prophet told him that? Could he have asked God if that's what he wanted to do? That happens a couple of times. Josiah did that and made a mistake and died for it too. He didn't ask God what to do. And I want you to look at one of the things that we're going to talk about today in Daniel, about what Daniel did in that circumstance. So, and basically Josiah is mentioned in that episode. Josiah's name, I think, is mentioned in that episode. Either that or a specific king. I don't know which one it is. Don't hold me to that, but I think it was Josiah. Obviously, Josiah went up and found this prophet's tomb. And that's mentioned in the accounts of what Josiah did. But anyway, basically, so who is Jehoiakim? Well, Jehoiakim is a son of Josiah. He is one of Josiah's sons. Josiah has 4 sons. And I know I know you're all just chomping at the bit to understand and learn all this, but it's important when we start studying it. He had one, Johanan, Jehoiakim, Zedekiah, and Shallum. Now, Zedekiah, I think, was originally named Mattaniah, but he was named Zedekiah by the Babylonian king when he put him on the throne after another king. Jehoahaz, or Shallum, was renamed Jehoahaz by Pharaoh Necho, who killed Josiah in battle in the valley of Megiddo. So the sons of Jehoiakim were Jeconiah, his son, and Zedekiah, his son. Now, only one of these sons has much to do with the kingdom, and that's Jeconiah. And here's the passage in 2 Kings. The reason this is so entangled is because these guys had far more than one name in Scripture. Don't get confused by these guys. It takes some sorting out. In 2 Kings, it says, when the king of Babylon made Mattaniah, Jehoiachin's uncle. Who's Jehoiachin? Okay, well, we're going to find out in just a minute. Jehoiachin's uncle, that happens to be Mattaniah, and changed his name, made him king, and changed his name to Zedekiah. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king. Zedekiah was actually the very last one, Karen. He was the very last king of Judea to sit on the throne physically. Okay, and he later rebelled against Babylon and paid for it. But he was the very last king. He was preceded by Jeconiah, who was Jehoiakim's son. Jeconiah is the grandson of Josiah. He's known by two other names. He's known by the name Coniah and Jehoiachin. And I started to put about 10 or 15 different scriptures on the screen that it takes to prove that that's good judgment, to see that these are the same guys. And I decided not to put you all to sleep by doing that. Simply take my word. Coniah, Jehoiachin, and Jeconiah are the same person, just by different names. They're also known as, a.k.a. Coniah, Jehoiachin. So that's where we're going with this. They're all three the same. Even Wikipedia understands it, so it's got to be right? Then I want to point out something to you here. This Coniah and Jehoiachin is actually in the lineage of Jesus. We find this in Matthew 1, 2 through 16. If you want to read this, and it's Josiah begot Jeconiah. Actually, that's his grandson, not his son. But then that happens sometimes in these lineages. Just like if they put Austin's lineage in, they might list me as begat Austin Jones. But he's my grandson, not my son. James is in the middle there. And it says, after they were brought back from Babylon, and Jacob begot Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. So this guy is in the lineage of Christ. But look what it says about him in Jeremiah. It says, this man Coniah, a despised, broken idol, thus says the Lord, write this man down as childless. He was not childless, but as childless. A man who shall not prosper in his days, for none of his descendants shall prosper, sitting on the throne of David and ruling any more in Judea. What does that mean? Jesus is now his descendant. That means Jesus is not going to rule in Judea. He rules in your heart. And he rules over the world, but he does not rule in Judea. His kingdom is of a different nature. And this is one of those passages that shows us that. We need to understand that, especially if you're getting people trying to tell you this premillennium business about Jesus is going to come back and establish his throne in Jerusalem again and rule for 1,000 years. Ain't so, folks. Okay, let's take a look at Daniel. And I'm going to deal with Daniel here in terms of food and drink. And the reason that I did this, wow, am I running out of time. The reason I did this way and mentioned that bulletin is I want you to ask questions about this. We're going to read this episode, and then we're going to look at it, and I want to ask questions about it, and I want you to really look close at it. What do you think? You all know this episode. Basically, this is 3 through 1. It says, the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge, and quick to understand, who had the ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. And please go to that look. I left some stuff out here so I could get it all on one page. But Daniel proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of eunuchs that he might not defile himself. And the chief of eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear, my lord, the king who has appointed your food and drink, for why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age, and then you would endanger my head before the king? They had some unique solutions for people that didn't get their job done back then. And I want to mention here the name. I got this from a source. I'm not sure about this source, but it makes sense to me. The name Daniel, he changed Daniel's name. That's part of what we left out here. The name Daniel, meaning God is my judge, was changed to Belshazzar, meaning Bel's prince. You'll see Belshazzar mentioned later on as his name. And Daniel ends with the E-L, L, which is God. This is probably, if we did a literal translation, Daniel probably literally translated as, my judge is God. That's the way most of the Romance languages do that. Why did Daniel say this? Well, there are a lot of things in the Psalms and the Proverbs about it. One of them is, do not incline your heart to any evil thing, to practice wicked works with men who work iniquity, and do not let me eat of their delicacies. That's probably symbolic and not literal, but I think Daniel might have had that in mind. In Proverbs 23, it says, when you sit down with a ruler, is he going to sit down with the king? Consider carefully what is before you. Put a knife to your throat. If you are a man given to appetite, do not desire his delicacies, for they are deceptive food. What's happening here with giving all these young men from Israel good food and drink? I want you to remember this passage. I think Daniel is practicing this passage. For we walk in the flesh, we do not, for though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God, pulling down strongholds, casting down arguments, and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. Daniel was obeying God. Why was Daniel not going to eat these foods? Why was he not? Yeah, the law of Moses, basically these foods were not being prepared according to the law. God had told him, don't eat this stuff. And I want you to think about, why did God tell him not to eat that stuff? As a matter of fact, what did God tell the children of Israel through the law of Moses to do or not to do? First of all, they couldn't wear mixed clothes. They couldn't wear linen and cotton together. You had to wear all one kind of clothing. Why? What's that? Well, that's one reason, but I want to point out something to you that's a little different from that I think is maybe what he was trying to tell them. He's trying to tell us that. You're right, absolutely right, Karen. He's trying to tell us that. But I think he was trying to tell them something else. And I think Daniel understood that. And so, not only that, they had a certain way they had to trim their beards. When a woman was in her menstrual cycle, they had to treat her a certain way. All of these things were, why did he ask them to do that? Why did he tell them to do that? And what depended on them doing that? What depended on them doing that? Yeah, exactly. Their relationship to God depended on them doing that. So why do you think he did that? And let's think about a little bit about that. So Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs set over Daniel, and these guys have all been renamed. He says, please test your servants for 10 days. Let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink, and then let your appearance be examined. And he goes on, and he gave them this knowledge and skill and wisdom and Daniel and all this, and it turns out great, okay? I really hate it if a vegetarian ever gets a hold of this story. It's going to make them unlivable. But anyway, so why was Daniel making such a big deal out of this? Well, of course, he was told by God not to. Okay? So basically, yes, Daniel had a command to do what was to eat, but here's the questions I want people to start asking about these scriptures as we go through them. What is this teaching us? What lessons does the law of Moses teach in general? And Karen has already mentioned one. First, and this is the one that I think is most important, it teaches us that our relationship with God invades every aspect of our lives. Everything you do, outside that door, inside this door, involves your relationship with God. And I think that's a lesson we miss. In Daniel, it was the things he ate. In us, it's what we think about, what we do, how we get control of ourselves. Every thought brought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. Everything we do. Is God watching you? Yes, he is. Is he watching everything you do? Can he not see through the roof when you go into the house? I have a hard time convincing Karen of that sometimes. But he's watching us. He sees what we do. And everything that we do actually affects our relationship with him. And this is the one Karen pointed out, and I think that's the one, it makes them look different. It makes us look different to the world. You need to be different from the world. That's part of the lesson here we're seeing in Daniel and what he's doing. And what are the characteristics of it? So it goes on, and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to take this a little bit further. So basically, when it's all over, the testing is all over, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in all his realm. Thus Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. Daniel is considered by most scholars to have been in his 80s and 90s when he died. He was probably approaching 20 when he was taken to Babylon, and he lived there for more than 70 years. So he's probably in his 90s when he dies. Daniel is an old man, and we can look at some of the things that he did. But I want to look at some of the characteristics, the things Daniel had to consider. And these are characteristics that I think we should have. He had to consider that basically not taking the king's food was an insult to the king. What might the king do? It might be pretty bad, possible punishment. Rejection of it. He was there by himself. He's 1,000 miles from home, maybe. And he's got no other way to support himself. He will die if he's not supported in this. Mere distance and away from home or family or whatever makes compromise. What happens when you're away from home? You're more susceptible to doing things that are necessary, just maybe even to get back. You're susceptible to compromise. And the lesson of Job, this was God's doing. What might tempt someone in that position to say, why did God do this to me? You ever thought that? Why did God do this to me? Okay, think about it. The test. Daniel addresses the eunuch's concerns and shows a character trait of Daniel. What is the character trait of Daniel? If you had to describe it in one word that we've studied recently, what would that word be? Meek. He was strong. He spoke when he should, but he was gentle. He did not return harsh words. What would someone do today in that position if they were, I'm not going to eat this food and throw it on the floor or throw it back in the eunuch's face? No, not Daniel. Daniel said, okay, let's not do this. Let's test us and see if we can satisfy your concerns. What's that? That's a characteristic of a meek person. Strong in that he's holding to his beliefs, but he's gentle in his return and his speech. That's meek. That's what God wants us to be. So Daniel is among these things. He says, so he had this command, so you shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, and I will take sickness away from the midst of you. That was a promise they had as a physical nation. That was what they were there for. He was exhibiting, I think, Daniel in this instance is a picture of what James 3 looks like. If you want to know what James 3 looks like, he says, but the wisdom that is from above is first pure, obeyed God, peaceable, he didn't want to cause trouble, gentle, he was gentle in the way he spoke, willing to yield, full of mercy, good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. Now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. I think Daniel was that in a word. If you want to know what James 3, 17 and 18 look like, Daniel in this instance was that when he was talking about the food. Ephesians, let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. And do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you are sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice, and be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you. What would be the temptation for Daniel in that? Would he be bitter toward the Babylonians? I think it would have been very easy. Daniel, when you read the book, Daniel was a patriot. He loved Israel. He loved Judah. It would have been so easy to be bitter. It would have been so easy for wrath or anger to come out. And yet he controlled that. That's meekness. That's what it takes. Now, God had brought Daniel into favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs, and I think that characteristic, Daniel did other things in this that's not written down. And that's what brought him into that character with the eunuch. That's what brought him into favor, was that kind of thing. And I'm out of time. The lesson is yours. I'm going to do one more thing. If you got just a minute, give me just a couple of more minutes. Because I'm a fan of Calvin and Hobbes. And you can read them on the internet. Here's one for you. If you don't know Calvin and Hobbes. Do you think that babies are born sinful, that they come into the world as sinners? That's Calvin. And basically, Calvin is named after John Calvin, don't get me wrong. No, I think they're just quick studies. And Calvin says whenever you discuss certain things with animals, you get insulted. Hobbes also, there was a gentleman by the name of Hobbes who was of the opposite pole. And so these two guys have counterparts in history that argued basically religion back and forth. Here's another one for you. It says, I've decided to be a fatalist. That's Calvin. All events are preordained and unalterable, whatever will be that may, and if anything bad happens, it's not my fault, that's fate's. And so Hobbes trips Calvin, and he screams and falls over, and Hobbes says, too bad you were fated to do that. And Calvin yells, that wasn't fate. So this is the kind of thing, if you read Calvin and Hobbes, you're going to get this occasionally. It's not always that way, but thought you might enjoy that. Lesson is yours. Any questions? I will take questions. Forgive me for all the history, but I think it's necessary when you start reading it.